We're also going to be talking to Nuala Donlon from Greyhound Action Ireland about the issue of children being exposed to gambling at Greyhound tracks. Last year there was over 17,000 entries by children where they see bets being placed and gambling, including ads to download things like betting apps. So that's coming up for you very shortly. You're listening to Mornings with Wendy on Spirit Radio. Did you know that last year there were over 17,000 children that attended Greyhound racing tracks around the country? And at this location, there's a lot of exposure to gambling, to betting, things like betting apps being promoted. So what sort of an impact is that having? Well, on the line to tell us about her concerns, we've Nuala Donlon of Greyhound Action Ireland. Nuala, maybe start off, is there an age bracket that kids have to be to go to Greyhound racing, or do they just have to have a parent or guardian with them? How does it work?
Well, you have to be over 18. Good morning, Wendy. You have to be over 18 to go into a betting shop. You cannot go into a betting shop with anybody if you're under 18, and there's good reason for that. It's to prevent children being exposed to gambling. Children can go into Greyhound stadiums if they're in the company of an adult, and they can sit beside that adult at a table and watch the adults place bets on the tote. Children are not allowed to stay after 9 o'clock under 18. They're not allowed to stay in a public house after 9 o'clock, but they can go into a Greyhound stadium and they can stay in the bar until 10, half 10, whenever the Greyhound racing finishes. So there seems to be parallel laws in this country, one for Greyhound tracks and the rest for the rest of the country. And as you said, there are 17,000 children entered Greyhound Stadium last year. That's not including children now who'd have got in on sort of discount benefit tickets and stuff. So I think the question needs to be asked now, why is it damaging for under 18s to be exposed to gambling in a betting shop, but it's not in a Greyhound stadium?
When your point is they'd be seeing a lot of the same things, they'd be exposed to a lot of the same stuff.
Absolutely.
I haven't been to a Greyhound racing track. Maybe describe it to us, Neil. I haven't been to a Greyhound racing track in many, many years. What is it like in terms of their exposure to gambling?
Well, there's quite a large presence of gambling, of people taking bets there. And the tote comes around to tables in the hospitality area and they take bets there. And then they go and they look at the race they've bet on. So not only are they watching adults placing bets, they're also then watching perhaps dogs dying in front of their eyes on the track. 202 dogs died last year while they were racing on tracks. Hundreds more injured. So, I would argue that Greyhound racing is not just damaging in terms of exposing under 18s to betting. I think it's damaging in terms of exposing children to fairly gruesome scenes on a track. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I watched a race that was televised or on had official video footage released of a Greyhound race in Donegal. And the poor dog, one of the dogs got injured very early on in the race, and all you could hear over the video footage for the rest of that race was this dog screaming in pain. Now, I don't think that's suitable for a child. I mean, most people would shield children from this kind of thing if it were, a pet dog or whatever was suffering, or any animal or any
Are
human.
we seeing any particular trends in Ireland in general when it comes to Greyhound racing? How popular is it, or are the numbers attending dropping? What about that, Nuala?
Well, you get some idea when I tell you that in 2023, Greyhound stadia around the country were 70 to 91% empty. And the attendance figures for last year came out there just last week, and that is down again by 25,000. So virtually nobody is going Greyhound racing, except a small number of people who are directly involved or who would have, family connections or whatever. So there isn't a huge number of people going Greyhound racing. But at the same time, there seems to be a different law for Greyhound stadia when it comes to children and betting and children and alcohol. And we're just asking the question, why is that the case?
It sounds like you've concerns overall, though, on the kind of gambling side of things. But what about, you're mentioning there, obviously, the impact on dogs. What have you seen with your work with Greyhound Action Ireland in terms of, the welfare and the well-being of the animals used in Greyhound racing and the funding as well? How does that all work?
Well, you see, this is an activity this is actually run by a semi-state body, believe it or not. The state runs this activity and gives them about 20 million from the public purse every year. And I talked there about deaths on the track, and that's really just the tip of the iceberg. If you consider that, say, we're tracking, since the Greyhound Board put in place a traceability system at the beginning of 2021, and we have been tracking the fate of the dogs born each year since then. And we were looking just recently at what has been happening to dogs born in 2021 and 2022. In those 2 years alone, there were over 24,000 racing greyhounds born in Ireland. 15,000 and a few hundred of those remain on the island of Ireland still. The rest have been exported. Of the number remaining on this island still, over 6,000 are dead or unaccounted for. They just didn't make the cut, or they were no good to the people who wanted to make money from racing them. And they are gone. That's 40%, just over 40% of the dogs. Now, the oldest of those dogs would be 4. The youngest would be 2. And those dogs are dead, are gone. We know the majority of them are dead. The rest of them have never been tracked. So that gives you some idea of the scale of the destruction of unwanted dogs in greyhound racing. So, that alone. Then we have the whole issue of drugs, cocaine, several kinds of human drugs given to dogs to make them run faster, or indeed, as we hear from industry insiders, to make them run slower, because there is a huge problem. And I know a number of people who have given up greyhound racing because of the use of drugs to try and cheat the system and to try and influence winning and losing. So, and as I say again, Wendy, I think it's worth repeating, this is run by a semi-state body that receives 20 million. Since 2001 has received 368 million of taxpayers' money.
Which is hard for people listening who might be deeply uncomfortable with some of the facts that you've highlighted in relation to children and gambling and animal welfare. That's taxpayers' money funding something that you mightn't necessarily agree with.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm sure there are people who listen to this programme, and you turn on the radio any day in the week and you hear people on there who can't get proper assessment for their children who have special needs. You have people waiting 5-6 years to meet a specialist on hospital waiting lists. I mean, you could go on. And yes, this activity, for some reason, itself, greyhound racing and horse racing, the only 2 activities in this country that are guaranteed public funding by law. I mean, isn't that crazy? That this is written into a law. So governments would have to actually change the law to stop funding these 2 organisations.
Well, thanks so much, Nuala, for joining us today, just to highlight some of those issues that I'd say a lot of people aren't aware of. That's Nuala Donlon of Greyhound Action Ireland chatting to us there.